Welcome back everyone to this lecture where we're going to discuss a basic Flask web application and how that relates to deployment. We're now going to focus on taking our model, our scalar, and our prediction function and deploying them using a Flask web application. And in case you've never heard of Flask, Flask is essentially a Python-based web application framework. Flask uses Python to handle the back end of a web application. And the back end is where all our Python code is, it's where our model is running, it's where we load the model, the scalar, and our function. And then later on, what Flask allows us to do is then connect it to front-end components. Those are things like HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So what is this actually going to look like? We're first going to construct just a basic Flask app. So in this lecture, at the end, we'll actually code out a very basic Flask application that will just basically run a website saying the Flask app is running. It won't have anything to do with a model yet. Once you understand how to run the Flask application, we're going to integrate our TensorFlow model, the scalar, and the prediction function, and essentially write that into the Flask application. Once we have that ready to go, it's time to interact with the Flask application and with actually deploying our working model. There's two ways we can do this. One is through an API request, and we can use something like Postman, which is a program we'll show you later on, that can send JSON information to the Flask application, essentially interacting with it programmatically, and it gets back a result from the model, such as Setosa. And we can do this with Python as well. We can use the request library that's built into Python, send that over with JSON information, and then get back a result. Once we understand how to do that, we're going to connect the Flask application to a front-end HTML form. So the way this works is a user will actually visit what looks to be a website with an HTML form. They'll provide numbers for each of the feature attributes. That gets sent over to the model, and then the model runs through its prediction and returns back on a new page what it believes the prediction should be so the user can actually interpret that. Okay. So let's get started with just a basic Flask application. To begin, we first need to download a text editor. Now, if you're familiar with any sort of web application programming, you probably already have a text editor. But for our use case, what we're going to be using is the Sublime text editor. So let's show you how to get it. Okay, here I am at google.com. What you need to do in order to download the same text editor that we're going to be using to actually build out our .py file, go ahead and just type in Sublime text, hit enter, and the very first result should be www.sublimetext.com. Go ahead and click on this, and this is essentially a text editor. Now previously, we've been working with Python notebooks, or if you've been running stuff online, Google Colab online notebooks. To actually run our Flask web application though, we need to run a .py script, just a Python script. And that's because we can't run these things through the Jupyter Notebook, because the Jupyter Notebook itself runs in a browser, and that will begin to interfere with Flask's capability to run a web application. So go ahead and go to sublimetext.com and then click on download, and then download the appropriate version of this text editor for your operating system. There's for Mac OS, Windows 64-bit, and then Linux. If you actually go to the website, it should automatically detect what operating system you have, and you should see a little download button. Okay. Go ahead and download and install that. Keep in mind, you can use any text editor you prefer for writing .py scripts. So if you like Visual Studio, if you like PyCharm, if you like Atom text editor, those are all totally okay. You'll just write the exact same code we write into Sublime Text. Now, I've already downloaded Sublime Text, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up on my computer. All right, so here I have Sublime Text opened up. And what we're going to do is we're going to write a Python script. So instead of writing stuff as a notebook, instead we'll just write it as a .py script so we can call it at the command line. First thing we want to do is write from Flask, import, and then with a capital F, type out Flask. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is that the actual syntax here isn't having any color, basically showing you that it's a Python script. And that's because we haven't saved this file. So after typing out that line, go ahead and say File, Save As, and then what's absolutely critical here is you need to save this in a location that you know. So I'm going to save this in the same location as all our files for this section under 09 deployment. So what I'll do here is I'm going to save this as my underscore example.py. And then go ahead and save that. And once you save it with the .py extension, you should suddenly see Sublime Text Code Editor recognize that you actually have Python. So you'll notice the highlighting occur. All right, so we're going to say from Flask, import Flask, and that's basically the first import we need to run. Next, we create the Flask application by saying app is equal to Flask, notice with the capital F, and say underscore underscore name underscore underscore. That essentially creates your Flask application, and then Flask uses a routing system to display information on a page. And it uses this by using decorators. So you say at app.route, and then inside of this routing function, you provide the actual web domain path. If you want this to occur on just the home page, the index page, go ahead and just write a single forward slash. And then write a function below this called def index. And then we're going to return with this function just a header 1 or heading 1. We'll say h1 Flask app is running. And then we'll close this off. Notice that this is all contained within a string. Okay. If this is completely unfamiliar to you, what this is doing as a heading 1, then I would highly suggest you check out a web development course, because you should learn about web development first before trying to deploy a model. Again, this is not a web development course. Here we're just discussing how to deploy a model, given the context that you already know something about web development. And then finally, to run this file, we'll say if underscore underscore name underscore underscore is equal to, and then in quotes here you'll say underscore underscore main underscore underscore colon, and then say app.run, open and close parentheses. Go ahead and save that. Absolutely crucial that you remember to save that. And then open up your command prompt. So again, you need to make sure that you know exactly where this file is located on your computer. I won't be able to know where it's located on your computer, but again, notice here, I just saved it to my deployment location. So under TensorFlow 2 Bootcamp, under 09 deployment, I now have my example.py. So let me go ahead and now open up my command prompt and run that file. Okay, now here I am at my Anaconda prompt. You can use also your normal command prompt for this, but use the same place where you've been activating your environment. First thing I want to do is actually activate my environment. So you can go ahead and say activate, or conda activate actually, and then whatever name of your environment that you've been using. So I went ahead and called mine TF2 GPU. I'll hit enter. Notice now it's activated. And then we need to make sure that we already have Flask installed. So say pip install Flask, and then hit enter. In my case, I've already installed it, but just in case you haven't already, go ahead and install it. Remember to activate your environment first. Now, you need to change directory to wherever you save this myexample.py. So in my case, I'm going to cd to where I saved it. So you just keep typing change directory until you find where you actually saved it. And I'm using tab to autocomplete. I would highly suggest you use the same. And now notice where I'm located. I'm now located under that deployment folder where I saved the .py file. If you saved your .py file to your desktop or your downloads, then you'll need to change directory to where that is saved. Okay, so now that I'm there, what I'm going to do is say Python space, and you should now be able to start typing my example or my underscore example, hit tab, let it autocomplete. If it auto-completed for you, then you're in the correct location. If it did not auto-complete for you, then you are in the incorrect location. And then go ahead and hit enter. Okay, immediately upon hitting enter, you should see something that looks like this. It'll give you a little warning saying it's a development server. Don't use it in a production deployment. That's totally okay. That makes sense. We are just developing this. We haven't deployed this yet. Later on, when we actually deploy this to the live web, we'll show you what changes you need to make. The other thing you should notice here is Control+C will actually quit this and kill your Flask application. The other thing you'll notice is it says running on, and essentially a local connection at port 5000. So what you need to do is you need to take this address and type it into your browser. So do not use Control+C to copy this, otherwise it'll quit the server. So go ahead and then go to your browser and type that in. I'll bring in my browser now. And now bringing in my actual web browser, at that I see that heading 1 Flask app is running. Okay, that means everything's working, and then you can go back to your command line and do Control+C to kill the server. Coming up next, we're going to see how to combine this basic Flask application that's running to then deploy our model with our return predictions function. I'll see you there.